All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to get let into the Zoom. I want to say greetings and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the country. As people are joining the Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and not waste any time because I want to hear all about this topic. We've been waiting for the 7 things you need to do to secure your clients for a while now. So I'm excited to hear about this topic. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our guest, and then I'm going to turn it directly over to him so that we can use all this time to get all this great information. So, Nihil, I apologize. I did not ask you how to properly pronounce your last name.
It's Majaria.
Majaria. Thank
Sorry.
you. I wanted to make sure I didn't mess it up. So
Appreciate it.
Nihil Morjaria is the Chief Revenue Officer at usecure, where he leads global revenue strategy and partner success for the company's human risk management platform. He has a background in psychology, which is cool, and extensive experience in cybersecurity, go-to-market execution. He brings a human centric perspective to reducing organizational risk. I like that. He is very passionate about empowering MSPs with automated training, simulations, and data driven insights that strengthen security outcomes. And in case you don't know anything about us, I'm Heather Mathis from Start Grow Manage, and we are like an MBA program for MSPs. We help MSPs get out of the day-to-day technical work through our Spark community and other programs that we have. So if you're interested, feel free to check us out online at startgrowmanage.com, apply, or you can scan the QR code that is on the screen. But we didn't come here to talk about that. We came here to get our pro training. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn this over to Nihil.
Thanks, Heather. And thank you for joining, everyone. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that was a very in-depth introduction. So thank you. Um, Perfect. All right, everyone. So like Heather's mentioned, today we're going to go through the 7 things we need to do to secure our clients. And the large focus of today, sort of the underpinning theme throughout that, is around the human element. As Heather mentioned, that is our specialization as an organization. It's exactly what we speak about day in, day out. So what we want to do is think about ways in which the human element might be a bit of a risk factor in our client base and some practical steps that we can take to help to reduce that risk. So I mean, Heather's given a very good introduction to myself, so I think she's summarized things nicely. But in short, my entire focus within usecure is to make sure that we can empower our partners, that we can help them to understand where these gaps in human risk might lie, how to tap into the messaging around human risk management, how to think about ways that compliance might be shifting this, how AI is shifting how we're talking about human risk, and trying to essentially help our MSPs to understand or help to communicate to their clients and help them understand why the technological trends are essentially informing the real life trends that their clients are experiencing, and the human element that is combining all of that together as well. So as a general agenda for today, we're going to go through very briefly just a little bit about who we are at usecure. I appreciate some of you might not know about us, might not have interacted with us in the past, and so I want to spend a little bit of time just talking through our background and ultimately why we're in a position to talk about human risk. We then want to move into why human risk matters. Human risk is something which I think a lot of people have considered, a lot of people have looked into, but it can quite often be a medium priority until something unfortunately occurs. And so I want to touch a little bit on some of the trends that we're seeing, the current state in human risk that means that it's becoming a higher priority than ever. And then the practical stuff. We want to go into 7 things that we can do to secure our clients when it comes to human risk. We'll distill that down into some key takeaways. I appreciate these sessions can often include a lot of information. So if we want to look at this no matter whether you are starting from scratch with human risk, whether you already have programs in place that we're trying to refine, what are some of the key takeaways and applications that we can have to actually ultimately help our clients? And then finally, we'll have some space at the end for any questions. I'm more than happy to field anything around the area of human risk. Any challenges you might have had when it comes to speaking to your clients around this, and really helping to understand why human risk as a general entity is evolving and ultimately becoming a more tricky domain in cybersecurity. So, who we are. usecure have been around for almost a decade now. Our focus, our entire specialty, as I mentioned, is on human risk management. Everything we do as an organization is directed towards understanding the employee, understanding their risk vectors when it comes to cybersecurity, and ultimately trying to reduce those threats. We know that traditionally human risk management or security awareness programs can be quite difficult to get engagement with. And so we've wanted to, again, really look at what modern human risk requires and create a program that's really fit for purpose. I don't want to go through too much about how we operate and what we do, because I appreciate this is more around the general topic and education, but I think it's important to mention essentially that our track record in this space. And so, as I've sort of touched on, the sort of background story towards usecure is that we know cyber threats are evolving, but human error remains the biggest risk. It remains the consistent variable. And we have some statistics that we'll go through shortly to really demonstrate that. But when we look at cybersecurity and we think about the idea about controlling the variables, human risk is quite often a variable that we have struggled to get a handle on traditionally. And so, as our CEO mentions, we set out to build something better, an automated, smarter approach to managing human risk built for the channel. And so that means the idea is about scalability, it's about non-intrusiveness, and it's about forming habits. And that is a lot of the fundamental underpinning principles behind human risk management. Is how can we make this something which is just embedded? Modern organizations, modern employees spend so much time operating online. It makes complete sense, complete logical sense that they would then get reinforcement and help to make sure that we can empower the end users. And if we can empower the people element of it and supplement that with infrastructure, all of a sudden we have a much more robust client base. And that's the goal here. And before we go through those 7 key steps to secure your users, I wanted to go through some high-level statistics here. Like I mentioned, we know human risk is a recurring theme throughout breaches. 70% of cyber incidents had a human element. Quite often it's phishing, misuse, just general error, insider threat by accident from staff members, not following correct protocols, not really necessarily being trained on what those correct protocols should be, and opening up the organization to those cyber risks. Almost in response to those type of historical trends, if we look back at these sort of statistics around the human factor in breaches, they're consistent, which tells us that it's an issue which over time we haven't quite been able to evolve at the same rate that maybe attackers are evolving in terms of how they're focusing on the end user. And so what we're seeing now is a massive regulatory response. ISO 27001, NIS2, SMB 1001, SOC 2 alignment, CIS controls. The way you look at it is globally, and particularly in the US, there are more and more frameworks that are explicitly talking about the need for security awareness and human risk. Essentially, it's a response to these real life trends that we've been seeing for years. And it's now a regulatory response that says this is no longer best practice. This is mandated elements of good security posture. And so it formalizes it. It essentially gives us a structure that we can follow to help us to understand, because it can be quite tricky to isolate the factors in human risk and to really understand and put a number against human risk. And so these guidelines and these frameworks and these laws give us something to aim for, give us a reference point and something that can help to structure ultimately how we help to empower the human element. And the great thing about human risk factors is that, or human risk programs, is that it doesn't take a huge amount of work for it to start to have real returns. Organizations using ongoing training see up to 50 to 70% insecure behaviors over time. There is tangible proof that if we take the time to understand the users and we take the time to empower them, we then get those returns tenfold coming back. We help to reduce that 70% involvement. We help to control those variables that we mentioned. And 80% of auditors now expect evidence of security awareness beyond just policy documentation. Auditors now want to see proactive, intent-driven programs, things that we have in place that are, again, designed to systematically help and empower the staff members. And that takes us on to human risk management. What is the framework? What is the mechanism by which we can reduce those risk factors, understand them, identify them, train, monitor, and verify? Those are the 4 fundamental principles behind human risk management. It's essentially a modern approach. It's a strategy that replaces those traditional awareness programs. We've all been there before, where we've been sent training that is overly long, that doesn't feel particularly relevant to us, where as we're going through it, we're quite aware that this is to tick a box, to be able to say, yep, we've done our annual training. And if we're being honest, 3 months later, are we any more secure for that? Are our behaviors any different? It's very unlikely that's the case. And ultimately, you can't blame the staff member for that. If they're not getting reinforcement, if they're not technical, if they're not thinking about IT, why would they internalize that information that was likely delivered in a way that wasn't exactly engaging in the first place? And so what we want with human risk management is a program that gets that engagement, but also a program that reflects what modern human risk needs. And so identification is a really important step here. With human risk, we have to remember that we are ultimately human beings and that we have our own individual areas of strength, our own individual areas of weakness. Right? We all have our own blind spots, but also areas that we really excel in. And one of the issues with traditional awareness training, which you might have seen if you tried to deploy this or you do currently deploy this, is it's a one-size-fits-all approach. We treat everybody the same and we send everybody the same training. And what that ultimately means is that we might have vulnerabilities on an individual level that we don't really understand and we don't then remediate. And so a really important step with human risk management, a really big differentiator, the defining factor of it, is identifying those risk factors. Once we identify them, we can then inform how we go about remediating that risk. And so we want to deliver targeted training. If I understand that a staff member is not too comfortable with setting secure passwords and the best practices, that should be a training course we prioritize for that individual. And that way we have a way of identifying those risk factors and systematically reducing them over time. Now, what we also want to do is verify that understanding. We don't want to just tick that box and say we've done training and we move on and the company isn't any more secure as a result. We want to verify. That's not a case of trying to trip people up, but it's a case of replicating the real life threats that we are all seeing. We're seeing a lot of our clients report far more targeted phishing attacks, far more sophisticated social engineering attacks, where it's building on information that is maybe out there on all of us on the dark web, or just generally on publicly available services. And attackers are using that to make sure that those phishing attacks are much more personal and much more likely to get an emotional response. And so we want to verify. We want to make sure that the training that we're sending them is actually being internalized. And when we apply it to these realistic phishing attacks, they're actually being savvy. They are taking the steps to identify those campaigns, and therefore the real life risk is being reduced. And that then links us nicely into monitoring. Like we mentioned, 80% of auditors expect to see real security awareness programs. And so, again, one of the challenges is operationalizing risk. Like, how do we take quite an abstract concept of risk and turn it into a number? If we turn it into a number, we can assess risk and we can also assess progress over time. And so it's really important with human risk management that we have a way of being able to contextualize risk, a way of putting a number against it, a way of then being able to monitor and continually assess month on month, quarter after quarter, and show how, as we're verifying, as we're training, as we're identifying, that overall company risk is reducing. Auditors are happy because we're showing that progress over time. Our clients are happy because they're seeing the value that we're driving with human risk management, and ultimately the organization is more secure. And so we can then measure that human risk reduction over time. We can go beyond those traditional training approaches, and we can make sure that we're aligned with those compliance standards like ISO, like CIS controls, and ultimately make sure that we're evolving as modern risk evolves. And so that takes us on to 7 things that we need to do in order to secure our clients. Firstly, we want to measure behavior, not just technology. Technology infrastructure is always going to be absolutely crucial. But one of the issues that we found is that maybe the people behind that technology, the end users, the employees, haven't had the same level of investment. And so it's really important that we can assess user behavior and that we can understand that real risk for that person, as we've been touching on, not just the technical vulnerabilities of the infrastructure. We talked about the 70% number on a previous slide. According to Verizon, 74% of breaches involve that human element. And so it's really important that we can measure, again, those real life behaviors of the human being and use that in conjunction with technology. If we can do those points, then the weaknesses, the blind spots of technology and the weaknesses of human risk management can get covered by each other. And again, we then have a much more robust security ecosystem as a result. Step number 2 to help secure your clients is move beyond annual training. If we are still sending maybe new starter training and then maybe refreshing them every year, ultimately we need to replace that with continual security education that will reinforce things over time. It's about building habits. It's about making sure that we can use continual reinforcement and that we can educate people, and that almost without them realizing, they start to employ these best practices. It's not a conscious decision anymore. They've just been trained in bite-sized ways continually throughout the year. And so this doesn't just become something that we talk about in Cybersecurity Month. It becomes a part of their continual processes as a modern organization, because we know users forget up to 90% of training within 30 days without reinforcement. That is an insane amount of information that we have potentially just chucked at them and we're hoping sticks, when the stats shows that just isn't the case. When we think about anything that we try to learn, whether it's around IT, whether it's in our personal life, if we don't reinforce that skill, that muscle becomes weaker, and then it's not actually going to be enacted on in practical ways. And security awareness training, human risk is no different. So that continual education drives that lasting behavior change. Point 3 is using phishing as education. So running phishing simulations is an incredibly effective way in a safe environment to understand that risk. We still know phishing is the headline threat. We still know it's the most visible one, and we know it's probably the most common route into an organization. And so we want to run phishing simulations as a learning opportunity. In the past, sometimes people have fallen into a trap of maybe thinking that it's a situation to trip people up, a situation to name and shame, to identify the users and then send out a list of those that gave away their password to a phishing attack in the hope that that then jolts them into acting more secure. In reality, what we need to do is use those ongoing phishing simulations as learning points. Identify those users that are most vulnerable and train them. If we have repeat offenders, then naturally we need that escalation. But as a sort of baseline, we need to use those phishing campaigns to identify the users that simply need more help. The way I see it is in a one-off compromise to a phishing simulation. If a user's done that once, it's likely a reflection that the training and the processes around it for the user just weren't quite in the situation they need to be. With repeat offenders, maybe then that's a situation where it's about culture, and we'll touch on culture a little bit later, but a culture of accountability from the user to realize that they have an active part to play in this. Ultimately, we can only identify those risks and build that awareness over time if we're running these regular phishing simulations. And then we focus on awareness and reporting rather than focusing on failure. So I touched on it just now. What we also want to do is build a security-aware culture, an environment where users feel responsible, supported, and confident. This is one of the issues that we've seen previously, is quite often staff members just won't know what's expected of them. Because they'll have seen that IT team have invested a lot in infrastructure. They know they have email security software. They know they have antivirus software. They know they have to use a password manager. And so it creates this environment of a false sense of security, almost like a detachment from their own IT security, to think our IT department have invested all of this. I therefore don't really have to be too alert. And What we want to do instead is build a culture of awareness, a culture of accountability, but also a culture where people feel empowered to report things they're unsure of, to ask questions about things that they don't feel too comfortable about. And so, if we can build that security culture, it leads to a faster incident detection. We're more secure as a result. We have, again, a new layer complementing the infrastructure of human beings. And so, a good way to do that is to inform them, to make sure that staff members are, again, being educated, but also that they're being sent a company policy that tells them that they have to do their training every month, a company policy that tells them that they shouldn't be using their work email to sign up for a free trial of a personal, personal brand that they want to use, that they shouldn't be setting the same password for every single site. And if the worst case scenario happens and they log into a site that they then realize afterwards didn't actually look legitimate, that they don't just cross off that tab and hope nobody notices, that they feel comfortable with informing IT, they know who they should go to, and they know that there is going to be an escalation process from there. And that then leads to that faster incident detection, at least that remediation. And it means that we, again, have those staff members complementing the infrastructure. As point 5 mentions, what we then allows us to do, is turn users into an early warning system. If we train users to recognize and report suspicious activity, it then again allows us another failsafe, essentially. User reported threats are often identified hours or days earlier than automated tools. And faster detection can reduce the breach impact by up to 40%. When we talk about human risk, that is never going to be zero. We have to be honest about that. We're human beings. There is always a chance of some level of human risk. But what we want to do is reduce that as much as possible and reduce the impact of any missteps as much as we can. And point 6 is aligning with compliance frameworks. Like I mentioned earlier, it can be quite tricky to know where to start. It can be quite tricky to know what good looks like, what best practices should be followed. And so standards like CIS controls, standards like ISO 27001 give us that framework. And what we're also very conscious of is that a lot of SMBs just they don't have the resources to deal with compliance. There's a stat where I think it's 86% of SMBs feel they will need external help with compliance. It's a wave that's not going anywhere. It's a wave that's building to more of a crescendo. And so it's not a question of will they deal with it? It's a question of how they'll deal with it, where they'll get their support from. And these frameworks, whilst they can be quite overwhelming, they can be quite intense. When we look at the human risk element of that, it's a really digestible element. It's a really clear, non-technical part of these compliance frameworks that is equally as important. But when we think about ways of aligning with compliance, when we think about evolving compliance more into what we speak about, how we operate, human risk can be a very tangible, accessible, non-technical way of incorporating more compliance into our offerings.
Before you move on, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
So I was looking at 4 and 5, and I saw there was really key users feeling comfortable reporting an incident. Are there any tips or things that you've observed that other organizations do or that you advise other MSPs to do to have users feel comfortable and not be embarrassed to say, hey, I accidentally clicked on this link? Do you get what I'm trying to ask there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are two main things that I'd suggest to implement for that. The first one is an internal policy around it. That can sound quite intense, but I think it's important to have something formalized from the organization that says, in the case of an incident, it's more important that we know about it than we have fear about blame. And I think having something formalized that helps to build that tone and helps to reinforce that this isn't just something which is word of mouth, it's a formal part of the organization, really, really helps. Another thing that we've seen, the second point that really helps to reinforce that is in Outlook, there's a phish reporting button. And that gives the users a mechanism to communicate about things that they're uncertain about. With us, for example, if it's a usecure phishing simulation, it tells the user, well done, you spotted a phishing attack. here's some positive reinforcement for you. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel part of the security posture. And it then means that if they get another email they're suspicious about, they're almost like chasing that positive reinforcement. And if it has been an external email, it will get forwarded to the IT team, and then they can investigate it. Small things like that that just help to build that culture, but also that habit really, really help.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so moving into the final thing we need to do to secure our clients, and that is prove and communicate risk reduction. This is really important for both getting the client buy-in, but also, again, aligning with compliance. It's really important that we can communicate to our clients and, again, contextualize this data and help them to identify not only the good work that we've done to help reduce risk, but also where there's vulnerabilities still lie. And that, again, sort of coming back to what you were talking about, Heather, in terms of your question around like building that culture, it helps to take ownership to say, again, human risk is a continual program. This isn't something which we can say, yep, done, our human risk is now sorted. We have to accept that there is always going to be an element of risk. Best practices are always changing. And therefore, there will always be zones where an organization could do better. And if we can communicate that to our client, if we can show them the positive trends, but show them where the work is still to be done, it gives us tangible action points. It helps us to keep looking forward. And we know that organizations with measurable security programs experience lower breach costs and improved risk visibility. The way I always look at it, especially when we think about things like phishing simulations, is whether you run that simulation or not, that risk still exists. The question is whether you want to be aware of that risk or not. If you don't run the campaign, the user is still just as risky as if you did run the campaign. That vulnerability might still exist irrespective. But the question is, do you want to identify that risk and then do something about it? And that's where this reporting is really important. And so tying all of this together, if we had to distill this down into some key takeaways that you can apply immediately, we want to measure human risk through user behavior. Can't just rely on technical controls. We need to provide risk-based scoring to make this visible and supplement the infrastructure. We need to replace annual training with continuous security education. I appreciate if your clients are doing annual training at the moment, that can feel a little bit daunting sometimes. But in my experience, if we explain the training as bite-sized, relevant, personalized, people will latch onto that much more than the idea of a 3-hour seminar every year on IT security. We can then use phishing simulations as a tool, not as a test, as something to use as learning points rather than something to name and shame and trip people up. If we get those elements right, we then build users into an early warning system. We have another layer, another set of eyes, another layer in our security that ultimately makes us more robust. And then we build compliance into everyday security. Rather than seeing compliance as a burden, we can see compliance as a guide, a framework, a North Star for us to work towards to make sure that we have the right human risk measures in place. So just wanted to very briefly touch on a few elements of the usecure philosophy before we go to the Q&A. We really want to lead on the education side of things, but I think it's important to just very briefly touch on some of the broader elements around this. So a really important part, again, our philosophy around human risk management is to make sure that we can innovate. You know, we've spoken before about how traditional awareness programs haven't necessarily evolved. Maybe that's why that 70% number of incidents involving human risk has been so consistent, is maybe because the awareness programs we've been deploying haven't adapted along with recent threats. And so it's really important that we can innovate the product and keep up to date with the relevant latest threat vectors. We want to automate. A big part of what we've talked about with human risk management is embedding it, making it continual. The best way of doing that is by having automation in place. So we're not reliant upon a person to have to keep on deploying systems. Let's get it as embedded as possible and make it just a part of their standard process. What links with that is integrating. It's really important that we can have an infrastructure that talks to each other. And again, that helps with things like our reporting. We want to make sure that it's nice and engaging, that we have the analytics to be able to keep people on board. And again, one of our core facets of our philosophy is to be partner first, to really understand what challenges MSPs are having in the human risk space and how we can help them to combat those. And again, that's part of the reason why I really wanted to talk about compliance today. We know it's something which is really gathering momentum, particularly in the channel, and can again be quite a daunting topic. So very briefly, we have success-driven support available from day one, things like live chat supports, sales and marketing resources. I mainly want to talk about the community side of things, though. We're very conscious of making sure that we are present at events, that we are doing things like this session, for example, where the focus really is on general education, and so I think it's important if you see us at events, come and speak to us about human risk, speak to us about the challenges that you might have been facing, speak to us about why maybe you've tried to deploy an awareness program and maybe you can't figure out why it didn't get the engagement that you wanted to. It's really important for us to make sure that we're embedded in the community and that we get that type of, I suppose, feedback on the real life things that people are experiencing when it comes to human risk. And that helps to inform how we can ultimately enable our partners. So I am conscious of time as well. So what I want to do is just give us a little bit of time at the end just to make sure that we have a space for any questions as well.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll give you guys a few moments. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, I want to thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was extremely informative and something that every MSP can use and apply right away. Oh, I just got a note that said chat was disabled. How is that? All right, let me see if I can fix that. Or is the Q&A open? So if you can't put it in the chat, can you put it in the Q&A? There we go. Looks like Q&A works. All right. All right, so if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. All right, okay, so I don't really have a question, but I think it's great that you're addressing the human factors. And so it was a comment and not a question.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Great.
Well, hearing none, then again, I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. And for helping our audience get more educated on how to secure their clients. I think this is a critical issue. Before I started with Start Grow Manage, I worked a lot in corporate, and a lot of the things that you discuss were never discussed there, right? So I appreciate the approach and the like our person in the question said. I really think it's great that the human factor is not left out, because in today's day and age, it's always let's automate this, let's click a button. But usually, like you said in your statistics, if it's a phishing scam, it's going to be because a person did something. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me on, Heather. Yeah, and thank you everyone for your time as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. And we will see you guys for our next pro training. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.